In this video, we look at 9 teachings of Ramesh Balsekar on free will and guilt, drawn from his talks and from his book, Consciousness Speaks. The first teaching is the foundation everything else here is built on. You are not the author. Balsekar returns to this constantly. What you call you, the body sitting wherever you are right now, the mind producing the thoughts running through it, is not a self-directed creature making independent decisions. It is an instrument, he says, a body-mind organism through which something far larger, which he often simply calls consciousness, happens to be operating. Notice how strange that sounds the first time you hear it, and notice too that strangeness is not the same thing as falseness. Ask yourself, honestly, whether you have ever actually caught the moment a decision is made, watched it happen from the very beginning, or whether it has only ever arrived already formed, presenting itself to you as if you had chosen it all along. Balsekar used to tell visitors who came to argue this point that the confusion is understandable because the sense of being a doer is one of the most convincing illusions the mind produces, reinforced every single day by language itself. You say, I decided, I chose, I made up my mind, and every one of those phrases quietly assumes an independent self standing behind the action, directing it like a general moving troops on a map. Notice how deeply this assumption is baked into the way you talk about your own life, and how rarely, if ever, it gets examined instead of simply repeated. Balsekar often used a simple image to make this concrete. Think of the body-mind as a radio, and consciousness as the broadcast signal moving through it. The radio does not generate the music itself. It simply receives and expresses a signal that was already there, shaping it according to its own particular hardware, its own particular tuning. A cheap radio and an expensive radio will render the same broadcast differently. One might be tinny, another rich and full, but neither radio is the actual source of the music playing through it. Watch what happens to your sense of personal ownership over your own talents and flaws once you consider that your body-mind might be functioning the very same way, a particular receiver, shaped by genetics and circumstance, rendering a much larger signal in its own particular style. He would often ask visitors to consider something even more basic before going any further. Did you choose the body you were born into, the century, the country, the parents, the language your mind now thinks in? Of course not. And yet every decision you believe you are now making freely is happening entirely from within that unchosen starting point, using a brain, a temperament, and a set of instincts you never selected from a catalogue. If the raw material producing every thought was never chosen, Balsekar asked, on what basis can the thoughts that material produces suddenly be called free? That question leads directly into the second teaching, and it might be the one that changes the most once it actually lands. Free will is an optical illusion. We believe we are choosing, Balsekar says, but the decision itself arises before conscious thought ever catches up to it. This is not just a spiritual claim. Notice it for yourself the next time you make even a small choice. What to eat, which route to take home, what to say next in a conversation. Watch closely, and you will find the option simply appears, already decided, and the sense of, I chose this, gets stitched on afterward, a story added after the fact to make the whole thing feel authored. Balsekar liked to point out that you cannot even choose your next thought before it arrives, which means the very apparatus you would use to make a free choice, thought itself, is not under your control to begin with. Try it right now, before reading further. Try to predict, with certainty, exactly what your very next thought will be. You cannot, because thought does not announce itself in advance for your approval. It simply arises, the way a bubble rises in water, and only after it has already surfaced do you get to call it mine and claim you meant to think it. Notice too how this teaching is not the same as saying nothing ever happens, or that choices don't occur at all. Choices clearly occur, options are weighed, decisions get made, actions follow. What Balsekar is questioning is not whether choosing happens, but whether there is a separate, independent chooser standing outside the whole process, pulling the strings from some private control room. Examine the process closely enough, he suggested, and the control room turns out to be empty. The choosing still happens. It simply happens on its own, the way digestion happens on its own, without you personally directing each individual step of it. Now here is where it gets personal, and this is teaching number 3, the end of guilt. If you are not, in fact, the author of the action, then carrying the weight of regret for the rest of your life is simply a mistake of perspective, a case of blaming an actor for lines it never actually wrote. Don't rush past this one, because it is easy to hear it as permission to stop caring about your behavior, and that is not what Balsekar meant at all. He meant something closer to this. Examine the thing you have never forgiven yourself for, and ask honestly whether, given everything you knew, everything you had been through, everything your nervous system and history had shaped you into at that exact moment, you could actually have acted any differently than you did. Not, should you have known better, in some abstract hindsight sense, where of course, looking back now with information and maturity you did not have then, a different choice looks obvious. Balsekar's question is stricter than that. Given the exact person you were in that exact second, with that exact conditioning, that exact level of fear or exhaustion or ignorance, was a different action genuinely available to you, or does it only look available now from a vantage point that person did not yet occupy? Notice too how this differs from simply excusing yourself without ever looking closely at what happened. Balsekar was not suggesting you skip the honest reckoning of what occurred, who was hurt, what could genuinely be learned from it. He was suggesting that the reckoning does not need the additional, separate weight of ongoing self-punishment layered on top of it in order to be complete. You can understand exactly what happened, feel real sorrow about its consequences, and still recognize that the punishing, repetitive replay of blame serves no one, least of all the people who were actually affected by what you did. He would sometimes tell visitors that guilt is really just pride wearing a disguise, the insistence that you were important enough, powerful enough, free enough to have single-handedly determined an outcome that in fact required an entire web of circumstances to produce. Carrying guilt in this light is a strange kind of self-flattery, a refusal to admit how thoroughly you too were simply conditioning playing itself out in that moment, the same as everyone else. The fourth teaching follows almost automatically once the third one is accepted, and it is the end of judgment. Just as you deserve no ultimate credit for your successes, you deserve no ultimate blame for your failures, and the same logic, applied honestly, extends to absolutely everyone else around you. Watch how this reframes the people who have wronged you. Not as an excuse for harmful behavior to continue unchecked in the world, Balsekar was careful about that distinction, but as a genuine loosening of the private, personal resentment you may still be carrying towards someone who, examined closely enough, never actually had a separate self capable of choosing to hurt you on purpose in the way you have been telling yourself the story. Notice the difference Balsekar drew between functional judgment and personal judgment. A judge in a courtroom still has to weigh evidence, still has to hand down a sentence, still has to function within a society that needs boundaries and consequences to operate. Balsekar never argued against that kind of practical judgment. What he questioned was the private emotional layer added on top of it, the personal hatred, the need to see someone suffer, the conviction that this particular person, uniquely among everyone conditioned by their own history, somehow deserves a special category of blame that you yourself would be exempt from if your own conditioning had gone differently. Notice, before moving on, how this teaching about judgment applies with equal force to strangers you will never meet, the ones you read about in the news, the ones whose choices you have opinions about from a comfortable distance. Balsekar would sometimes ask visitors to imagine trading places entirely with someone they judged harshly, not just imagining their circumstances abstractly, but genuinely inheriting their exact brain, their exact history, their exact accumulated conditioning, down to the last detail. Ask yourself honestly whether the outcome could have been any different at all, given that complete a transplant. This is not an easy exercise, and Balsekar never pretended it was, but he insisted it was the only honest way to test whether your judgment of another person was actually fair or simply comfortable. Fifth, and this one tends to surprise people because it points the same logic back at your achievements instead of your mistakes. Pride is a trap. Celebrating your success, Balsekar says, means quietly ignoring the infinite biological and environmental variables that actually produced it. The genes you were born with, the family you happened to land in, the teachers who happened to notice you, the 1,000 invisible circumstances that lined up long before you ever felt like you were trying hard enough to deserve the outcome. Ask yourself how much of what you are most proud of was actually available to you before you did anything at all, sitting there in your circumstances like an inheritance you never applied for. Balsekar was fond of asking successful, accomplished visitors a deceptively simple question. If you had been born with a different brain, into a different family, in a different decade, do you honestly believe you would have achieved the same things? Watch how the question lands. Most people, if they are honest, admit immediately that the answer is no. And yet the sense of personal ownership over their achievements rarely loosens its grip just from admitting that out loud. Notice the gap between intellectually agreeing with this teaching and actually feeling its weight the next time you are tempted to take full credit for something that went well. Sixth is one of Balsekar's most memorable images, and it might be worth sitting with longer than the others. The film is already shot. Life, he says, unfolds the way a movie unfolds once it has already been filmed and edited, scene after scene playing out in a sequence that was fixed the moment the reel was completed. You are the screen the film appears on, not the actor making choices inside it. Notice how this differs from fatalism experienced as despair. It is not a reason to stop living fully. It is an invitation to watch your own life with a little more of the ease you already bring to a film you are simply enjoying, rather than the tension of a performer convinced every scene depends entirely on getting it right. Notice how differently you watch a film compared to how you live your own life. Watching a film, you can feel tension during a difficult scene, real tension, and still trust that you are not personally responsible for how the story resolves. Balsekar suggested that this same quality of engaged, caring, but ultimately unclenched attention is available toward your own life as well, once the belief that you are personally steering every scene starts to loosen its hold. Some visitors found this image unsettling at first, worried it meant nothing they did actually mattered, that every scene was pointless since the ending was already fixed. Balsekar's response was that a film already shot is not the same as a film not worth watching closely. Every scene still matters completely while it is playing. Every performance within it still deserves full attention and full engagement, precisely because the film is not experienced all at once from outside time, but unfolds moment by moment, exactly the way your life does. One scene fully present at a time. Seventh circles back to something we touched on earlier and grounds it more firmly. Conditioning dictates action. Your reactions, Balsekar insists, depend purely on your genetics and your upbringing, a kind of programming installed long before you had any say in the matter. Watch the next time someone irritates you, and a sharp reply leaves your mouth almost before you notice forming it. That reply came from somewhere. A lifetime of patterns laid down by people and events you never chose either. Examine your own most automatic reactions this week and notice how little deciding actually seems to happen in the half second before they occur. He liked to point out how much energy people spend trying to will themselves into a different personality altogether, forcing patience where none is currently available, forcing confidence where fear is what actually exists in that moment. Watch what happens the next time you catch yourself demanding, internally, that you simply stop being anxious, stop being defensive, stop reacting the way you always react. Notice whether the demand itself produces the change, or whether it just adds a second layer of frustration on top of the original reaction. Frustration at yourself for still being exactly the conditioned creature you have always been. Balsekar liked to remind visitors that even the desire to change, to become calmer, kinder, less reactive, is itself just another thought arising out of conditioning. not proof of some separate willpower standing apart from it. This is not meant to discourage effort. It is meant to loosen the harsh private verdict so many people pass on themselves for not having tried hard enough, when what actually happened is that the conditioning present at that moment simply had not yet shifted toward the conditioning capable of producing a calmer response. Eighth is the illusion of control, and Balsekar often illustrated it with a simple, almost funny comparison. Suffering from trying to control the future is like suffering from trying to control the direction of the clouds. You can plan, you can prepare, you can do everything reasonably available to you, and the actual outcome still arrives from a vast web of causes far larger than anything a single body-mind organism could ever hope to steer. Notice how much of your daily anxiety is really this exact struggle in disguise, an exhausting, quiet effort to grip an outcome that was never in your hands to begin with, dressed up as responsible planning. Watch, too, how this differs from carelessness. Balsekar was not suggesting you stop checking the weather before a long drive or stop preparing for a job interview. He was pointing at the layer underneath that reasonable preparation, the anxious gripping need for a guarantee that things will turn out a specific way, a need no amount of preparation can ever actually satisfy, because the final outcome always depends on factors reaching far beyond any single person's control, no matter how carefully they planned. And that brings us to the ninth and final teaching, the one Balsekar offered as the practical resolution to everything above it: true responsibility. If free will is an illusion, if the film is already shot, does that mean you should stop trying altogether? Balsekar's answer was no, and this is the teaching that keeps the whole thing from collapsing into passivity. True responsibility, he said, is acting on your best judgment in the present moment, fully, wholeheartedly, without fanatically clinging to the outcome that follows. Notice the difference between that and giving up. You still act, you still try, with everything available to you in that moment, exactly as fully as anyone who believes in complete free will would try. You simply stop demanding afterward that you must have been the one controlling how it turned out, and you stop punishing yourself when inevitably some of it does not go the way you hoped. Visitors sometimes pushed back on Balsekar here, insisting this whole framework sounded like a convenient excuse for laziness, a way to stop caring about anything. He would usually respond by pointing out how much more energy is actually available to someone who has stopped fighting reality on top of dealing with it. Fighting the fact that an outcome is not entirely yours to control, on top of actually doing the work in front of you, doubles the effort for no real gain. Drop the fight, he suggested, and the same wholehearted engagement with life remains fully available, minus the exhausting layer of resistance that was never actually helping anything happen better in the first place. Sit with these 9 for a moment before you move on with your day. Notice which one landed hardest, and notice why. Often it is the teaching that challenges the story we are most attached to, the one about being the author of our own worst mistake, that has the most to offer once we finally stop defending it. Notice too that none of these 9 teachings ask you to believe anything on faith. Balsekar was famously impatient with visitors who simply wanted to adopt his conclusions as a new belief system to recite. He wanted each person sitting in front of him to actually test these ideas against their own direct experience, to watch their own next decision arise, to examine their own oldest guilt, rather than simply nodding along and walking away with a clever new philosophy to repeat at dinner parties. The invitation here is the same. Don't take any of this on his word or on this video's word. Take the specific regret you have been carrying, whatever it is, and run it honestly through these 9 teachings one at a time, and notice what, if anything, is still left standing at the end. Notice too that these 9 teachings are not meant to be understood once and then filed away as a completed lesson. Balsekar's own students often reported returning to the same points again and again over years, finding new layers each time a fresh regret or a fresh moment of pride brought the teaching back into direct, lived relevance rather than remembered theory. Ask yourself whether you are willing to let these ideas stay active in your life this way. revisited whenever the old habits of guilt and judgment resurface, rather than treated as a single video watched once and then set aside. Watch, as well, how differently these 9 teachings sit with you compared to how they might have sounded if delivered as cold, detached philosophy, disconnected from anything real in your life. Balsekar rarely spoke in the abstract for long. He would bring visitors back again and again to a specific memory, a specific relationship, a specific decision they were still silently punishing themselves over, and ask them to apply the teaching directly to that one concrete thing rather than to humanity in general. Try that now, with whatever came to mind while you were listening. Not humanity's guilt in the abstract, yours, specifically, about one particular thing, examined honestly in light of everything you have just heard. There is a kind of relief available here that is easy to underestimate before you have actually felt it. Most people spend enormous energy maintaining the story of themselves as free agents fully responsible for every outcome in their lives. And that story, however proud it can occasionally make us feel, is also exhausting to carry, because it means every failure, every regret, every moment we wish we could take back becomes evidence against us personally, proof of some deficiency in our character that we alone are responsible for. Balsekar's 9 teachings offer a different accounting altogether. Not one that erases responsibility, as the 9th teaching makes clear, but one that finally sets down the impossible burden of having been the sole author of everything that ever went wrong. Give it a real test before you close this video. Bring to mind, specifically, the one memory you have carried longest, the one that still tightens something in your chest when it surfaces uninvited. Walk it deliberately through all 9 of these teachings, one at a time, slowly, rather than skimming past them the way it is easy to skim past an idea that has not yet been applied to anything real. Notice, at the end of that walk, whether the memory feels exactly the same weight it did before you started, or whether something, even slightly, has already begun to loosen.